Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome Ketan Desai. He's a physician executive. His Kevin MD article is titled, Can Personalized Medicine Live Up to Its Hype in Healthcare? Ketan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We'll get into your article in a little bit. First off, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a physician and a scientist with basic science in cell and molecular biology and MD in allergy, immunology. And I'm also an author. I've been writing since I was about 15, 20 years old. I have a book on Amazon called Germs of War, which deals with bioterrorism, which some of you may or may not like that subject. But so I've been writing for a while. And so this article is one of those that I've written for more of a medical audience. I also write for audiences for investing in biotech companies.
All right. So let's go right into your article. It's titled, Can Personalized Medicine Live Up to Its Hype in Healthcare? Now, tell us, how did this particular article come together?
I was consulting. I do a lot of consultation for biotech companies. And so I was consulting for a biotech company, which is making a drug that will make steroids safer. And one of the indications they're looking at is lupus. So when they spoke to some of the KOLs or key opinion leaders, they said, oh, no, we're going to use stem cell therapy and CAR-T therapy for treating lupus. And I was thinking to myself, is this realistic to use such an expensive modality to treat patients with lupus? And so I delved into the science of CAR-T therapy and stem cell therapy to see how realistic and feasible it is to use such treatments for, I wouldn't say minor diseases by any chance, but at the same time, there's enough patients with lupus, for example, that it's just not feasible to do 300,000 patient therapy with CAR-T therapy.
So they asked you for your perspective. You consulted this biotech company. Why did they initially come up with this approach?
So they did not come with the approach. They came up with the approach that was to give another drug to decrease the side effect of steroids. So it's one of the KOLs they spoke to, one of their ad board members who said, oh, no, we're going to use CAR-T therapy for treating lupus.
So when you gave them that feedback, what was their response?
Oh, they were very pleased with the response because they understand and appreciate that how you can treat a large number of patients with CAR-T therapy is very difficult, impossible actually. It may be applicable to one or two patients here and there, but to use this modality of personalized medicine for a large number of patients is just not possible.
So you talk about personalized medicine in this article, just so everyone's on the same page. In your mind, what is personalized medicine?
That's a very good question. So personalized medicine is something that is applicable to only that person. That kind of treatment is applicable to only that person and no one else. So for example, if a patient comes to me and has a gene defect, and that gene defect can be treated by, let's say, gene therapy, that gene therapy can be given only to that patient. I cannot take that particular gene therapy and give it to anybody else, right? Similarly, CAR-T therapy is when you take the T cells out from that patient, modify them, and inject them back into the patient. We cannot give that to anybody else. It's highly personalized. Same thing with stem cell therapy. If I take somebody's stem cells out, modify them, and give them back, I can only give that back to that patient, not to anybody else. So these are all examples of highly personalized medicine.
So what's the current state of personalized medicine? What are some typical diseases that we use it for today?
It's mainly used for cancer. So cancer, which is refractory to all therapies, they use that for CAR-T therapy. And you will find that a lot of companies have now come up that want to use CAR-T therapy. In fact, if you look, you'll Google and find 20, 30 companies that use CAR-T therapy. And the venture capitalists really like it because in their minds, they're looking at big dollar signs because personalized medicine will cost $1.5 million as opposed to a simple treatment of steroids will cost $30, right? Yeah. So to them, it's a huge profit margin. So you find all these companies proliferating based on CAR-T therapy, and the VCs and private capital inject money into it, mainly for monetary reasons, not because they think it's going to be an issue of any sort for people.
Now, tell us some of the challenges that biotech companies face when developing a personalized medication.
So the challenges are mainly scientific. So if you come across a new therapy, you have to make sure that that's going to work in that particular disease model. And then, of course, you have the practicality of doing a clinical trial. It's not easy to do a clinical trial in CAR-T therapy, both from a practical point of view, because you don't have many sites that can do it. Number two, you have to find the appropriate patients who are willing to go through CAR-T therapy, and not all of them want to do that. because it is associated with significant side effects, both short-term and long-term. And then, of course, you have funding issues. And then fourthly, you have unique issues to biotech using CAR T therapy, for example, what we call chemistry, manufacturing, and control, CMC. So in a regular drug, CMC is pretty straightforward. You go to a CDMO or a contract manufacturer, they'll manufacture a drug to you, you take it to the FDA and give the CMC file, and you have the drug. When CAR T therapy, it's all personalized. You cannot have that standardized way of manufacturing. It's all very personalized. And so manufacture becomes very, very difficult.
So you mentioned CAR T therapy several times as an example of personalized medicine. You mentioned some short and long-term side effects of this. What are some of those?
Yeah, so it's something like a cytokine release syndrome. So they have a lot of flushing and diarrhea and fever and all the systemic symptoms associated with the infusion. So you're infusing T cells and the appropriate cytokines that will keep the T cells active. And that leads to a lot of the side effects of this.
So CAR T therapy currently, what's it being used to treat today?
It's mainly for oncology.
Which specific
And
cancer?
some of them are bone cancers like leukemias and lymphomas, mainly leukemias.
Now, are they part of regular treatment algorithms? Are they second, third line treatments?
They are fourth line, actually.
Fourth line.
Yeah, because so if you look at cancer treatment, it's extremely complicated. So you have first line, if they fail, you second line, then a third line. And then when everything, all the normal pathways are gone, it's only then you go to experimental. So as long as they have something that hasn't been tried, they have to do that first, which is what makes it very difficult to do clinical trials because there are so few patients that meet the criteria.
So in the mind of an oncologist, tell an example or story that a personalized medical therapy like CAR T therapy, when would that come into the decision-making process?
Yeah, after everything has been tried and failed. And so, the patient says, I'll try anything at this point. And then, of course, the doc has to find a company willing to sponsor that patient in the CAR T therapy program because, not all insurances pay for it at this point.
So how difficult is that whole process in terms of finding a company that would sponsor a particular patient?
It is actually quite difficult, even though there are at least 20 companies doing it. They are in their clinical studies, they have inclusion exclusion criteria also. And so the patient has to match the inclusion exclusion criteria. Not all patients match the criteria. And so, a patient may have one disease, whereas the active trial is going on for something else.
So what's the roadmap for personalized medical therapies, CAR T therapy and whatnot? What's the next few years hold for them?
So I think it's going to be extremely fluid. One of the things that I mentioned in my article is the state of affairs with funding for Medicare and Medicaid. If the Republican Congress cuts that funding, cuts Medicare especially, a lot of the insurance companies take the lead from Medicare. So once Medicare cuts something off, either decreases reimbursements or cuts something off, then the insurance companies will follow. And so here is a problem for the hospital that's trying to do a CAR T therapy. Their cost is not going to go down. It's still going to cost that much to develop that CAR T therapy. But if they're going to get less money for it, then it becomes a disincentive for them.
What's the incentive for the biotech companies to continue with CAR T therapy and other personalized drugs? Because it sounds like the yield is pretty low, very expensive, may not even get covered by insurances and Medicare. Tell me about the risk that these biotech companies face.
Yeah, so what you mentioned are all the risks, but the benefit that they see at the end of it is a large dollar sign. So they are still thinking in the old paradigm that, build it and they will buy, like Medicare used to do up till now. That has changed now because now Medicare can do price negotiation with the companies. That used to not take place in the past. And so it's going to start negotiating prices even for this. They haven't come to realization that's coming down the pike. And so they're still thinking in the old paradigm, going to make a lot of money doing this. Hasn't changed.
And what's your thoughts on that mindset?
I think that's a very antiquated mindset. First of all, I don't think we should be chasing science because of dollar signs. We should be chasing science because it's the right thing to do. And in a few individualized cases, it may be okay. So for example, if you have a certain kind of gene defect where I can take a gene therapy and apply it to many patients, whether that be sickle cell anemia or thalassemia or something like that, then yes, I think that makes sense. But to treat each individual patient per se, I think it's not feasible both from a practical point of view as well as from an economic point of view. I don't think our country can afford it. So we spend 20% of our GDP on healthcare, right?
Hmm.
We can't afford to spend anymore. We are not building bridges, we're not fixing roads, our electricity and airports are basically running down, and we are spending all our money on healthcare, and that's not sustainable.
We're talking to Ketan Desai. He's a physician executive. His Kevin MD article is titled, Can Personalized Medicine Live Up to Its Hype in Healthcare? So, Ketan, you mentioned that personalized drugs are typically in oncology, bone cancers in particular. Anything outside of oncology that's on the horizon when it comes to these potential applications?
Yeah, people have tried them in autoimmune diseases as well, like I was mentioning lupus. So some people have done small trials of 4 or 5 patients. I think one was in Italy that was done, showed pretty good results actually. I won't deny the results were good. But the point is, this is a long-term treatment in the sense that we have just seen the data come out of 3, 4, 5 months. We have no idea what will happen 10 years down the road. And of course, like I said before, I don't think it's feasible or practical.
Now, is it primarily small biotech companies that are in this field? Any of the big players that are pursuing personalized medicine?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you had GSK as a good example. So GSK did go into this. It had agreements with two biotech companies. I forgot the name, but a couple of years ago, it divested from that and said, we don't want to do this anymore. So, you have examples where everybody jumps into the fray and then looks at it carefully and says, maybe not.
Now, we're talking about mostly in the States. What about other parts of the world and their approaches to personalized medicine?
Oh, there it's going to be even less feasible. I mean, Europe spends, for example, 10% of GDP as opposed to our 20%. And their healthcare policies are far more restrictive in terms of reimbursement. And so one can argue the cost of doing something in Europe is less than here, but so is the reimbursement, and so are the guidelines. For example, in UK, you have an organization called NICE, NICE,
Hmm.
and the role of NICE is to make sure that the drugs that are being approved are cost effective, not just effective and safe, but cost effective. So they use something called QALYs, quality of life instruments,
Hmm.
to make sure that what you're doing is actually worthwhile. And so if they apply this quality principle to stem cell therapy and stuff like that, I have grave doubts it's going to pass muster.
And my final question, tell us some of your take home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Take home message is that the old ways and old way of thinking is over. It's time to relook at this whole issue in a fresh, pragmatic manner.
And how could biotech companies do that?
By forgetting the dollar signs all the time and looking at what's really feasible and practical.
Kaden, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.